So excited about this afternoon session. I'm a little, wow, like the two whiteboards. Dueling whiteboards going on up here. Woohoo! So this afternoon we have two incredible people to be here with us to share with you all. We have Dr. Lance Wallnau. Many of you, how many of you all have heard Lance speak before? Everybody, okay, awesome. Awesome. He is the founder of the Lance Learning Group. He teaches and trains in the field of organizational and personal transformation. How many of you have heard of the Seven Mountain 7M University? All kinds of resources and teaching, and we're just really excited about him being back with us today. And then we also have Gordon Pennington that is with us, who began his career on Wall Street, developing marketing communications for institutional investors, for the emerging electronic banking services sector for Citicorp, and as a consultant to both Chase Manhattan Bank and J.P. Morgan Bank. He also served as the director of marketing for Tommy Hilfiger, and where he helped position it as the fastest growing menswear company in the world. Way to go, Gordon. Good job. So, we are going to get ready to bring these two gentlemen up and have an exciting afternoon. So, are you ready? All right. You guys come on up.
I know it's in Deuteronomy, so I'm looking for it, I think.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here and to share the podium, the stage, this seating with a man I esteem highly and regard as a dear friend. And Lance and I have had an ongoing conversation that never seems to finish. We're always coming from somewhere and going somewhere, and I don't know how many times we've been on the phone in the last couple of weeks, but...
Right. We never quite get around to what we're supposed to talk about. Here, I got this. I'm wired.
Oh, yes, I've known that. And I'm getting there. Alas, I missed my plane this morning. I was editing a film till late last night. I slept for an hour, and I set 2 alarms. And I had to get up at about 4 a.m. to catch a flight, and I missed it. And then I had to drive to another city to catch the connecting flight. So I'm powered by ideas and caffeine and your prayers and goodwill. But we have been talking about this with such excited anticipation, and how to structure something that would mean not just fun for us, but meaningful for you, and to make it in the end useful and interactive. And with that in mind, I'm going to turn the you've got a microphone. I'm just going to set this mic down and propose, as Lance and I have talked about this, that he is going to lay out for you again. Many people here may not be fully immersed in the Seven Mountain concept. It's significant, it's time-tested, and it has relevance today in a more meaningful way than perhaps ever before. So with that, Dr. Wallnau, I yield the floor.
Thank you, my friend.
The chair.
How many of you have enjoyed what you've been hearing so far at the event? It's been incredible. I really believe that one of the qualities that we have to recapture is, right after around the time when Hitler began to accelerate access to nuclear fusion and develop an atomic bomb, Einstein, who was a pacifist, actually went to the White House and urged the government to, with all haste, to get their brightest and their best scientists together, particularly the ones who were kicked out of Germany as Jews, and let them go to work to catch up. Because even though the idea of having atomic power was repulsive to Einstein in terms of making a bomb, he realized that for that technology to be in the hands of someone who was demonized was even more dangerous. And so the typical a pattern of American history is the ability to mobilize resources, people, and creativity late in the game and do phenomenal things, from Pearl Harbor all the way to that moment. And so the White House issued instructions for 40 factories to be built and for the nation's leading minds to get together in unity around the race. And they were not in a race against each other, they were in a race against time. And I think that if all of our circumstances that have happened in the United States since the stock market situation and even with the election, all of those things I find are a grace of God to us, because it's driven us to the necessity of coming together, asking questions we weren't asking before, and having to be forced to work together in ways we haven't been forced to work together. And I think that we're in a race against time. And part of my concern is that we really need to know who the people are that need to be doing the dialoguing, and who the people are that are the practitioners out in the field who provide the laboratory. And we really need to, in a sense, and this is a charge I want to encourage you with, Gordon, because of your love for media, we really need to create the mechanism so that best practices can be articulated and refined, because that's really what the Manhattan Project is. And we are in a race against time, and we're not racing against each other. And with that thought in mind, to me it's a great privilege to have Ed Silvoso here. Ed, thank you for being here, because some of us are just upstarts in this thing. And I came along having really been driven and fed by generals who are before me to hear what they're saying. And I still feel that their voices like Ed Silvoso are in front of this evolving dialogue. So what happens sometimes, even in circuits that I get into, is people will hear me and not realize that I'm building off of the momentum of what other people have already sacrificed to start. And Ed, I don't think there's a better integrated practitioner of apostolic, prophetic, for those of you that are coming from the Morning Star Circle of Influence, apostolic, prophetic anointing with a message to the marketplace, and the balance. The big thing we're going to have, and I'm worried about, is we need to have the balance of really mature-minded generals speaking to this movement, because what will happen is, true to American innovation, I don't want to see the marketplace get ahead of the apostles, because if the workplace is premature in getting a hold of the wealth of influence or the wealth of access or the wealth of results, unless Moses comes down with the blueprint from God on how that influence and access and resources to be used, the tendency of those who plunder Egypt is to produce a golden calf rather than a tabernacle. And so what God's trying to build in the earth isn't a monument to our ingenuity and our anointing. He's trying to build his house. And his house is a house for all nations. What we're learning is it's a house made up of nations. And it's a house that is the inheritance of Jesus is nations. So, Ed, we need you to stay healthy and strong. And I just want all of you that are not familiar with everything he's written or is doing to make a connection with that resource today. Because I haven't done one event actually with that. It's the first one, which is bizarre in a way, considering that we're both rolling around the same field. The reason why the Seven Mountain concept took legs is because, frankly, it was a dead concept in the year 1999 or 2000. I heard Lauren Cunningham. I met Lauren. And Lauren told me about how he and Bill Bright had met years ago. And he said, we had a lunch, and the Lord's spoken to both of us this concept that there are 7 areas, seven spheres that really disciple culture, that shape the minds of culture. And in those 7 spheres, he said, we both wrote down what those 7 were. And he said, what was interesting is, and Lauren was telling me this kind of confidentially, and now I guess the church is further down the road. He said, he was a leading evangelical youth movement leader. Campus Crusade. It's primarily an evangelical movement. He said, here I was, the leading charismatic youth movement person. And it's interesting that God was speaking to an evangelical leader and a charismatic leader who were both the 2 largest youth organizations in the world, never even met each other, only in an awkward peripheral way bumped into each other. He said, so we made it a purpose to get together 24 hours before we met. He had a revelation, I had a revelation, and we were both occupied with it and decided to share it with each other. And as Lauren tells the story, he pulls out a napkin, Bill Bright pulls out a yellow pad, piece of paper, and they had both drawn 7, or they had 7 words. And they were saying, these are 7, Lauren called them 7 mind molders. Bill Bright called them 7 world kingdoms. And those 7, as he looked at him, he said, he who can capture these can capture the harvest of nations. I heard the story, and this was like 1974 they had this discussion. To me, it was like, why haven't I heard this before? You know, an idea, sometimes it hits you, and you say, it's too important to let go of. And I thought, this needs to be popularized. It needs to be made marketable, because the church needs to get wrapped around this thing. So that was when I started talking about 7 mountains, because the mountain metaphor made more sense to me, because it's a visual, and I'm big on visuals. You know, concepts need to be seen for me. But I knew once it started that I couldn't get rid of the message. And it was embarrassing, because I'd have my friends in conferences would say, are you still doing that 7 mountain thing? And it's like, this isn't like a net let down out of heaven. It was just a concept. It's just an idea. But it's an idea that says that nations are discipled by the dominant voices that are shaping the ideas that shape the minds of people. And that those ideas have a concentrated power in certain spheres, in government, in education, in business. But with technology coming out of business, we have a new thing the first century church had to deal with, which is the power of mind control. And mind control is a byproduct of who's controlling the dialogue, and media and technology has become the new god that is unifying a global economy, and he who controls the mammon controls the mind. So now you've got media, government, and the vehicles that are coming through the media. So we're living in a day where, in a heartbeat, we need to realize that our dominion issues set aside as to what level of authority Christians should have in culture. If we do not disciple the minds of cultures for God, they are already, by negligence, being discipled by Satan. This isn't like a blank sheet out there over nations, and Jesus saying, go write on it. It's a tablet that's being graffitied 24 hours a day by demons. And our job is to get into that dialogue and put the ideas of the kingdom in there in such a way that they become the new dominant reality. And so, Gord, I want to ask you a question. You said something once that impacted me. You said a couple of things. This is the one that I want you to share with other people. He said to me, I can walk into your teenager's bedroom, look at the clothes in the closet, the music on the shelf, the games they're playing, the DVDs they're watching, the posters on the wall. I will tell you who the top 5 Madison Avenue agents are who have made a fortune discipling your child while you weren't looking. And that one sentence opened up a window over my head that just was like, stop. What did he just say? He just said youth culture is aggressively being discipled by vehicles that are not in the possession of the local church arsenal, and most parents aren't utilizing. In other words, there's tools happening that are shaping the minds of people. Those mind molders. Talk about that. Is that for real? Am I quoting you correctly? And where is the latte that I asked for? And how come you got one? What? I asked for one, just like he did.
I might have yours.
Oh.
I'll share.
Wow.
Some of you remember Frontline, the television series on PBS, and how many remember Frontline? They ran a program more than, well, it's got to be close to 15 years ago now, called The Merchants of Cool. Anybody see it? The Merchants of Cool was a Frontline episode that explored the nature of the pre-selection and definition and development of, well, trend identification. And Madison Avenue, a lot of time and effort and energy goes into research on people's needs, wants, and desires. And that research is converted more effectively and with greater commitment and specificity of resources than many of the other counter agencies of redemption. I'll put that broadly. And as a result of that, we wonder what happened after 25 years of MTV. I remember I was in 4 countries. And the 25th anniversary of MTV, this is about 4 or 5 years ago. Is it? No, let's see. 97? Is that right? Or 95? well, it's a few years ago, but on the 25th anniversary of MTV, I was stunned to be in 4 different countries in the same week and turned the TV on in each one of those countries, and there was a celebration within the cultural context of MTV's influence. Stunned that one television network, the Viacom, some of you know a little more about my background. At one time, I was offered an opportunity with MTV, and I was shown by the president of MTV their strategic plan. And I saw in that plan a phenomenal commitment. Again, the focus, specificity of resources, and commitment to create global strategic change for commerce. Not necessarily for the common good, but for commerce. And the net effect has been the Americanization of cultures around the world amongst youth. Now, is that a bad thing or a good thing? It depends on you how you define Americanization. And Ed is probably offended already that I would suggest that Americanization means North Americanization. But I don't mean it exclusively, except that the influence that has been the predominant suggestive power, as Lance points out here, the mammon and the mind control or mind influence, we call it going from mind share to market share. You've got to get in someone's head before they start to make the requisite associations, at least with consumer media, to change behavior. The entire point in my background in marketing and advertising and media has been to influence people's thinking in order to change their behavior. We have had great challenges. What I see in circles of redemptive and kingdom influence is the difficulty that comes along with finding and identifying the right spheres of influence to convert or leverage business influence into something that has sustainable cultural change along with it. Mr. Eldridge was speaking earlier, and I was fascinated by the filmography in his background and what he's been doing through film, a vitally important process for influencing change. But where did film start? How did the film industry propagate, and what does it represent today? Without giving a whole history of film, film represents the opportunity, essentially, to speak narratively into people's lives. It's the essential replacement of the influence that the pulpit had, let's say, in the day of Jonathan Edwards and the Great Awakening in this country in the 1730s to the 1750s. The pulpit was the place where people went regularly to find a context for meaning. Today, more people go to cinema, including people of faith and redemptive purpose, possibly than any other place, to find an entertaining and engaging context for understanding life in its multiply nuanced meanings and implication. Now, having said that, how important is that? Sermons give us concepts very often, but what is more colorful than a story? What is more powerful than a parable? And the Master spoke in parables. What is a parable? Lance and I were wondering who would get to the whiteboards first.
Professor Pennington has beat me to it.
Well, think of a parable this way. Think of a parable on an A-B axis and then an XY plane. And think of a parable as nothing more than something known that reflects, if this is the known world, I'll get out of the way so the camera can see this. If this is the known world, this is where the Master takes his audience of whatever education or experience or context and speaks into the things that concern them, that interest them, that relate to them. There's relevance there. But the known portion reveals something unknown, the secrets of the kingdom. So a parable is essentially a parabola, yeah?
Is he not brilliant?
I mean, the Greek, so it's a mirror, it's a reflection. And what media does for us is reflect something that's highly, highly significant because we live in a telegenically immersive culture. There are little screens everywhere. In the emerging nations, in the emerging economies, screens are the link to the Western world, to trade, to the democratization of ideas, insofar as they're able to spread. Think about Boris Yeltsin's election. Our friend Mark Nuttall was the only American advisor to Yeltsin during the first democratic elections in the history of modern Russia, or the history of Russia entirely. And in that process, you might remember that there was an attempted coup, and it was the early use of the internet. Yeah? Do you remember this? It was the internet and emails that allowed the people to organize and to get information that historically was not available to them through a channel like that. So Pravda, as a friend of mine calls the Washington Post, Pravda on the Potomac, but as Pravda, the Moscow version, would provide disinformation. An old friend of mine, Dr. Sherman Garnett from Yale and the University of Michigan, was the lead interpreter of the Soviet systems of newspaper to look at what was being codified in these newspaper accounts that was a reflection of what was really going on. What I'm suggesting here, and Lance is suggesting, I think, is that there's a codification of ideas in our society today that is pointed to you specifically. Their sophistication and their innate understanding of technology and tools and the telegenicity that allows them to engage with the culture around them through social media in more and more robust ways is so significant that to not understand the importance of that component of the media mountain alone is to risk a catastrophic failure that we're already experiencing. We're disengaged from so many of the young people today who want understanding, who want ultimately to know what's authentic. This generation, the Generation Y, and the millennials, mosaics, are more concerned about authenticity than ever before. Why? I would submit it's because they've been marketed to and manipulated with such sophistication they can read through it even though they're still subjected to it. They're still vulnerable. So the component of this theory that interests me the most is how do we engage in that particular mountain? What's the strategy? What are the measurements? What are the goals?
All right, so let me jump in on this. So to bring it down home to what we're talking about here, he who controls the narrative that is popular in the minds of people controls the direction, the behavioral choices that people make, and those choices, if they are not lined up with God's non-optional principles, are going to produce cause and effects such as further demonization, deterioration, economic instability, divorces. In other words, we've lost the narrative. So I don't think we have to make an argument about that. We've lost the power of a prevailing narrative within our own culture, meaning the Christian worldview, the right and wrong argument of the Ten Commandments, ethics, fundamental morality. Those things, if you use those words, are now trigger words that immediately galvanize machinery against you. So to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove means you have to understand how the system works. And the system works by ideas that are marketed at unconscious levels and conscious levels through a variety of very powerful mechanisms. However, what works for one works for the other. The same mechanisms, once the church understands them, can work for the transformation of a culture and the gradual discipling of a culture in a positive way too. I think the one thing, I'd be interested in a soundbite from you on this, the one thing we have to recapture, once we're on agreement with what Ed's talking about, the basic idea that we have to love the world, not hate the world, be engaged in the world, not separated from it so that we're not leveraging our influence over any sphere. And then we are all ministers. Once we've got that established and we have authority within those spheres to bring the kingdom, if we get that down, then here's the next step that I think the church has to grow up on. You cannot, this is part of the seduction of technology and the manipulation of media in campaigns. You cannot take complex, profound issues and reduce them to 30-second populist sound bites and think that you have really thought through what you're talking about. For instance, I'm impacted right now, and it's coming home now. when Obama got elected, President Obama, on the idea of change. Understand how superficial and shallow the American culture is, and Christians, rank and file, are leading that parade. Nobody bothered to really get into the specifics of what change he was talking about. And so what's happened just now in Massachusetts, for instance, with an election, for those of you that are tracking with that, this major upset, when Ted Kennedy, for instance, who the New York Times calls the lion of liberalism, when in his own lair a young lion comes up and unseats his own party overnight, and nobody was seeing this coming. What it's telling you is that change that the president was talking about, he knew the theme would capitalize on what would get him in, but he never thought through, nor did we ask for, real clarity as to what that change really looks like. And believers are guilty of being clearer on what they're against than coherent on what they're for. And so we almost rightly deserve the stereotype of being ignorant, opinionated, inflexible, religious extremists. Because if you ask us, what is the solution to, the situation with pregnant women, we're not quite so quick on knowing the solution. We just know you shouldn't murder babies. But what's the answer? And how are you willing to sacrifice your own life to provide the resources to help women that are in an issue where they have to make those decisions? So the question I've got for you is this. What are some of the immediate takeaways from what happened in Massachusetts in terms of the power of catching the right narrative in the right context, and how quickly a narrative, if it's properly utilized, can work to unseat the status quo? And more specifically, what do you think about this idea that we're living in an age when profound things can be reduced to sound bites, and people are making decisions based upon sound bites rather than thinking? Those are two subjects. You can pick whichever one.
Well, I offer you first a sound bite. I couldn't resist.
Oh, okay.
Because it's so, as you say, superficial. The chattering classes, the punditry and the shrill punditry of antagonism that dominates so much of our TV viewing. Not to say that there's no place for it, but we need a larger, longer look at the implications of decision-making and those who have power. When people say that faith and politics make strange bedfellows, it's true, but they must coexist and interfere and influence each other, because politics is too potent a force not to be influenced by conscience. And faith is a reflection of a transcendent morality that we can't arrive at on our own. We need assistance from on high. And there's a bit of translation and careful linguistics there, because you have to be careful what you say and how you say it, because there's an encoding and decoding of meaning in our culture. There are buzzwords that we use which immediately set people off to stereotyping. Now, I've met many of you who are from a broad variety of backgrounds and socioeconomic experiences and geography, and from other countries around the world. And the most important condition of encountering another person authentically is to drop the stereotypes. Even if you've had experience with golf-playing Peruvian lawyers, and if you meet a Peruvian lawyer who's a golfer, you can't immediately assume they're going to be like other people you've met in that stripe, etc. The same thing exists particularly in politics, particularly in Christendom. People are motivated by different concerns. We can't resort to name-calling, but we have to be able to defend discernment. And what's happening today when I say the chattering classes, I mean the people who have to have an opinion about everything. And that's most of us, increasingly, because, as Lance pointed out, we're navigating at a greater speed, with greater complexity, greater tools for information. The computing power, the devices we hold in our hands or our pockets, iPhones and Blackberries and smartphones of a variety of type and description, have more computing power than the Apollo space capsule and the lunar landing module that put astronauts on the moon and brought them back. Now that's the sophistication of the device, but what's more ominous or empowering is the information that comes across it. So unless and until we begin to take hold of the idea that ideas have consequences and there's a historical context for everything that takes place, and as Santayana said, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. The business community, I'm not trying to make this a philosophy or theological history reflection point as much as what we want to do is apply it. Business people are really about application and outcomes. And it's got to be measurable, and it's got to be sustainable. And part of the joy of business is improving on methods and systems and improving particularly on outcomes. There is so much before us today in the era of innovation and invention that we're on the threshold of something greater than ever before. We're at the end of the 500-year delta where the transmission of information, its codification and replication since Johannes Gutenberg published the Bible far and wide and changed the world and set it up for the Reformation. We are at a place again today where through social media we can either be bystanders, innocent or guilty, or we can participate in robust new ways. But what we can't do is simply be passive. And I believe that we have to think about how social media is going to change every dimension of consumer business and practically everything else. If you don't understand it, or it feels awkward to you, you're not of a generational disposition to have grown up and feel comfortable with these things, you'd better find competent people you can hire. Find a 15-year-old or a 22-year-old or somebody in your organization who understands this. Because once again, it's going in directions that need conscience, that need guidance, that need... it's Pandora's box, and it's open. Now who will guide and shape it? And what will this look like, Lance, when it comes to fashioning that in the larger landscape of the Seven Mountains?
So the operative word, the number one word used to describe Satan's expertise over nations in the book of Revelations, what is it? Because it's not Islam, and it's not, terrorism, and it's not nuclear. The number one word that's used to describe Satan's power is deception. So what we're dealing with is now an ever more intensified wrestling with the spirit that I think we can now, I got handles for it. It's called end-time mind control. It's the power of Satan's leveraging the technology and the high places into a pincer-like absorption of the airwaves so that nations are becoming shaped by the mind control that dominates the high places. Christians that don't understand the battle for democracy, freedom, government, free enterprise, we somehow look at, the most extreme among us look at that as being a world thing, not really a, church kingdom thing. But the truth is, if you do not have a free press, if you do not have a free university, if you persecute and kill and murder and intimidate people who voice other opinions, those species of governments will end up becoming antichrist nations who will become militant and destructive to the purposes of sheep nations, no matter how much they want to peacefully coexist. So whether you like it or not, that's why I'm saying, Einstein said, we are on board the boat that is called this world system. And if that boat gets a rupture in the economic department, you're going down with the ship. I don't care what kind of faith confession you've got. The prophet Elijah was subject to the same conditions of famine he prophesied over Israel, but God made provision in the suffering. So having said that, I've probably lost a bunch of people there. We are not disconnected from the welfare of our nation. And it's an element of hubris in me when by faith I'm believing that I'm walking with God, got a covenant with God, and I'm going to... Yeah, my confession is in one part true. I'll be sustained. But God will bring me in such close proximity to the suffering of my culture that I will become like the prophets of old who feel the burden of the Lord for the nations, which means that we do not live in an airtight, watertight chapel compartment on the Titanic. If we're having revival in the chapel and we hit an iceberg, we're going down with glory. So the question really is, if we're smart and want to keep this thing real, then deception is the issue. The control of the institutions that shape the dialogue is in the hands of a minority of people. What Hunter would call a remnant elite, or sociologists refer to as remnant elites, we would probably be comfortable calling them gatekeepers. So they're the gatekeepers. They occupy access to the high places. And it's a minority of people that will control those high places. If the church is to be the head and not the tail, above and not beneath, we have to start to recognize who among us is anointed for the high places and begin to champion their emergence in their assignment and wrap our intercession, our resources, our prayers around those who have an anointing for preeminence within their sphere. So the businessman, the artist, the director, these are the next generation apologists for a Christian worldview. And they can be mentored by the pulpit, but their sphere will not be the pulpit. Their sphere is going to be a theater. And if we get them to rise up, what we'll have is a unique phenomena, which is going to be, you guys got a Bible. Look at this verse. I finally found it, Ed. I found it. I want you to take a look at this. This phenomenon is going to start to happen. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 7. We'll find that even though we're small in size, we can dispossess greater and mightier forces than we have, which is where Hunter's pessimism frustrates me. So, like in chapter 7, verse 1, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and has cast out many nations before you, in this case, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, 7 nations, which is convenient for me anyway, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. When the Lord your God delivers them over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. Make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them, nor shall you make marriages with them. So here's the sense of, I don't want you compromising with the spirits that are on those mountains. But we're called to occupy that territory, but not compromise with the demons that have dominated that territory. So what we've done is we disassociate ourselves from taking territory because it's unclean, instead of realizing that our job is that the sphere itself has the capacity to glorify God. And that if it's under the wrong stewardship, the glory is manipulated. It's like a veil is over the minds of people. But if the right stewardship is at the top of those mountains, the glory is liberated. And here's the verse I want to just hit on for a second, then have you ping off that. The Lord says verse 17, if you should say in your heart, but these nations are greater than I, how can I dispossess them? You shall not be afraid of them, but you shall remember well what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all of Egypt. The great trials which your eyes have seen, the hand of God and what he's demonstrated. I mean, I really believe for many of us that have had prophecies, seen healings, got saved, been filled with the Spirit, how many of you have seen the hand of God and know he's real? All of those experiences were meant to prepare us for crossing over into the first hour, I believe, in which the church in God's timetable begins to meaningfully engage high places to occupy them in the shaping of nations. All of those things were in the wilderness and in Egypt were meant now to be applied on the other side of Jordan. So the Lord says, I'm going to send the hornet among them, which means he's going to send supernatural disruption of your enemy's agenda. To distract, God's going to send circumstances to confuse your enemies once you start to move in the direction he wants you to move in. And you shall not be terrified of them, for the Lord your God is an awesome God. And here's the verse that's interesting. The Lord your God will drive out those nations before you little by little. Catch that? Although things can turn around in an election overnight, how many of you know, like certain times, I don't want the right my friends in office. Because, if the economy is going down, whoever's in office is going to take a beating over that. So I almost think God's wiser than us in terms of when he answers prayers. If God says here, I'm going to drive out those nations before you little by little, you will be unable to destroy them all at once, lest the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. But the Lord your God will deliver them over to you and will inflict defeat upon them until they're destroyed. So here's what I'm suggesting. Unless we have a Christian worldview for media, a Christian worldview for education, a Christian worldview for finance, business, prosperity, compassion, a Christian worldview on government and on justice, if we don't have a way of thinking that's distinct and able to be disseminated through social media technology and the leveraging of those places. If we were to be premature in taking territory that we didn't know how to govern and occupy, we would end up losing it and be in a worse position. In other words, another way to look at this thing is, God wants us to be able to, Napoleon put it this way, the objective of war is victory, but the object of victory is occupation. It's not enough to get a Christian in the White House or to have a conversion in NBC studios. You have to have a network of people sufficient to occupy territory, and it has to be a people who are mature enough in the spirit to handle the temptations and the warfares of the beasts that are in that arena, and not bow the knee to Baal, not compromise their integrity like Daniel, and be able to occupy, meaning we need networks of overcomers who are called to certain professions, who work together, who know each other, who support each other, and who are capable of occupying those spheres with a Christian way of thinking, so that those ideas can become gradually resent to the culture. And the next generation says purity is hip, sexual frivolity isn't cool, not getting pregnant is right, say no to drugs. There's certain themes that, that can prevail. We're going to have to do this, because I don't really think if we took the territory right now, we could occupy it. And I think what's in that territory would produce a backlash. We'd be 7 times worse. We'd be like Nazi Germany after the Reformation. Every institution we forfeit would be taken over by a deeper Antichrist spirit.
I'd like to explore a couple of themes here. We have very little time, and we want to bring this home into some application. And I don't know if there's Q&A at the end of this. But let me throw a couple ideas out, just riff off of what you're saying. One, the historic idea of nation states and sovereignty is being challenged. Powers and principalities are prevailing in new and uncertain ways, but it's clear that their demonstrated impact is showing up in new ways. What do I mean by that? The sovereignty of nations is in peril because people have a less and less clearly defined sense of political, social, ethnic, cultural identity. For example, the European Union was a reflection in losing the customs at borders, and an amorphous economic enterprise started coming together. In the United States, you're seeing increasingly, from the high bench in the High Court, the Supreme Court, you're hearing Ruth Bader Ginsburg refer to international law with a nod to its potential impact or supremacy over the Constitution. These are phenomenally significant shifts. This is all about nation states and their sovereignty. What I'm suggesting is something else is emerging. As a kingdom or a spirit of the age emerges, economically, clearly, we are so complicit with our historic, strategic, military enemies that we cannot now survive without the support of communist China. How did we ever get to a place like this? How quickly and how surreptitiously have the reins been handed to other forces and sources? What I'm suggesting here is, while you see these changes and the inertia behind it, Samuel P. Huntington, A Clash of Civilizations, in the historian Harvard, his most recent book is Who Are We? Questioning the nature of national identity. Increasingly, people have a sense of economic determinism that draws them to the states. Welfare benefits are better for, as well as opportunity. Quite understandable human motivations. But what does it mean then for people who are kingdom-focused, business-focused, have to keep their eye on the impact of economic policy, because it affects everybody? Possibly the greatest question that has not been addressed thoroughly enough by people who have a kingdom consciousness for business, and the idea that freedom of speech, the freedom of the rights of the individual own property, a free press, freedom of worship, this is historic liberalism. It is not socially re-engineered welfare liberalism, which has a very, very different rubric motivating it, to take from some and give to others. Does that sound a little like Karl Marx, to take from according to each ability and give to according to need? We are slipping into a philosophic and political shift that we're not quite aware of. Is the motivation entirely wrong? Not on the surface. We want people to have the benefits that the wealthiest nation and empire in the history of the world can afford them. But how? And it's the mechanism of the how and the political force behind that that has everything to do with, you can't give everything to everyone under every circumstance. There are specific and real limitations. And what's the dualism here? How does the operation of something we'll refer to as the kingdom of God as a feature of biblical insight reflect change in the way we do business, in the way we network and support each other? The fear of many people, and it's quite understandable, is that a theocracy grows out of this, and a small group of mean-spirited people acquire an institutional power leverage over others. And ladies and gentlemen, those of you of this persuasion will admit readily that we have a pretty sketchy history, those of you that subscribe to a historic Christian faith. It has not been even-handed institutionally. So what will this look like as a kingdom emerges that's multinational? It's always been this way, has it not? Who invented diversity? What was the first expression of diversity doctrine you ever saw, if it wasn't St. Paul, saying there's now neither Jew nor Greek, nor slave nor free, nor barbarian nor Scythian, nor male nor female? These are fundamental and essential distinctions in the Jewish and the Hellenistic mind. So to erase all, say, for all are one in what? Christ. If we don't recapture the servant-like attitude of compassion, the acquisition of kingdom power through the prophetic and supernatural will fail us all over again. And that's just history writ large. The principal change and the principal feature of a generous, redemptive community. I'm using words carefully here because I'm trying to steer away from the cliches and stereotype that have constantly held people of faith and goodwill back. But the people of faith and goodwill, in my estimation, are also the people that are the most determined to ask themselves the tough questions. Are we doing this the right? If we don't continue to go back to the mirror and the plumb line of transcendent truth and examine our own consciences and activities and motives, we're going to find that we don't always get it right. But the generosity of a kingdom vision for exploring and growing an international, this is going to be international, the nature of trade and the technology to support it off of cell phones and things that are almost unimaginable. You know, you can buy, sell, trade, invest, and do it all now. People who are literate and are growing in their appreciation of the advantages of education and mobility in East Africa, say, for example, amongst other places, are empowered in ways today that they weren't even 5-10 years ago. Are we coming alongside them? Yes. This leads to a whole other discussion, of course. It's what's the utilitarian consequence of being charitable and humanitarian versus not going far enough. I helped develop a group called Charity Water in New York City, 3 going on our 4th year now, charitywater.org. And you can, the lessons that have come from the genesis and genius of that organization that Scott Harrison founded and got me involved in from the very beginning has been a series of lessons on what does it look like to have a neutral interface with the secular world, even though there's a faith motivation. That begs another conversation exploration. The point here, I think, Lance, and I'm waiting for you to draw the mountains at least once.
What time does our session end? 5 minutes?
So,
okay.
Let's
all right, let me
land
do
this
this
plane.
real quick. All right, let's do this.
Wouldn't you be disappointed if you didn't see?
How many of you guys own your own business, have your own business, and are here because you want to get some down and dirty tips on what to do to get to the top of your mountain? Right? What do the rest of you guys do? If you're it's like a business conference, and how many of you are in transition? Let me get this right. How many of you feel like what you're doing now is not what you're really ultimately going to be doing, and in terms of your career expression, there's another sphere mountain you're exploring right now? Mamma mia, look at that. Interesting. Okay. So let's take a look at this real quick, the 5-minute version. What does Caleb say? Remember this? Caleb says, "Give me my mountain." By the way, we need. I like your markers better than mine. Let's get the black ones fun. You got the latte. It's like picking on the Jews over here. I don't get the latte. He gets the new marker. The Jew gets the old one. All right. So give me my mountain. Here's the quick 4-minute version of how this works. When the word is used to describe Daniel or Joseph, who are perfect models of marketplace, kingdom-changing, prophetic ministries, the word favor is used with both of them. And the word wisdom is used. And God gave Joseph wisdom and favor in the sight of Pharaoh, and same thing with Daniel. I want to suggest to you that wisdom and favor manifest in behavior. Daniel was able to speak the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. In other words, he knew how to interface with the culture that he was going to influence. Joseph, when he was summoned to Pharaoh's presence, did something interesting. Shaved his beard and put on a change of raiment, which meant he went into the Egyptian's presence looking like an Egyptian, but thinking like a Jew. So here's our challenge. Going into the world system with a clear ideology as to how the kingdom operates, but knowing how to interact with the culture without conveying our agenda prematurely. This is like the stealth part of this. It's very fun. It's a big adventure. Now, in terms of this is called like the iceberg. The iceberg says this. It's a pink iceberg, so it's kind of a gay liberated iceberg or something. I don't know. So, underneath the water here, nobody sees what's going on except you and God. But this is the integrity test. Because the thoughts you think and the feelings you have are going to be revealed in your behavior. If you love the world instead of despise it, if you want to be redemptive rather than selfish, your thoughts and feelings are going to show up in the way that you interact. Behavior. Behavior is the only thing people can see. What drives your thoughts and feelings is your paradigm of values. In other words, what you ultimately value determines what you think and feel. Where we've lost it with American culture, even in revival, we want people to have experiences, fall down, get healed, or we want to move them into our way of thinking. But if you don't change people's values under pressure, they'll still do the wrong thing. Because transformation doesn't happen at a thinking level, it happens at a values level. So what happens then is you have God's potential, which is your gifting. The gifts that God has given you and your capacity to glorify Him, they themselves are liberated. Watch what happens. When we're behaving right, thinking right, based on the right values, we unearth the potential God has in our life to manifest His glory. This is where a lot of us have been in. We've been in the battle for qualification for the next level. No amount of books, tapes, seminars, or training is going to put an anointing on your life, give you spiritual authority, or open up favor. Because those things are still supernatural transactions. Someone can lay hands on you, and the only thing you're going to get is what you have a capacity to receive. Nobody can make a capacity for you. You pay the price for that. This is where we've been. Most of us have been in the quarry being dug for the last decade. How many of you know God's had a chisel on your life? How many of you have felt the chisel? Do you know why? Because at the time when the temple was built, the stones were assembled silently. There wasn't fanfare. There's a lot of what God's doing right now has to be done very discreetly. He's positioning the people that have responded to the chiseling in new relationships and in new contexts so that He can demonstrate His house. So that work in the quarry was where we were getting qualified. Now what happens is God's grace, prophecies, potential gifts, when the right requisite values have been formed, our thoughts and feelings are congruent with heaven's values, then God releases something upon us. The favor in our behavior gives us access. Now here we go. These are like business, education, the spirits we're talking about. I want to know how to access the high places, because the higher up you go, the more concentration of influence. So if I have a choice between the president or the vice president or someone, I want to go, if possible, for the top. These high places, these gates, God is going to give to His people sudden surges of advancement into spheres of influence we've never had before. So this week, this came to me in several ways. But like when I had like the producer for Bob Dylan and Celine Dion in a seminar, an Orthodox Jew, whose girlfriend brought him to a Christian seminar. I didn't even know what he was doing there. But he had 5 days and 4 nights with me. He was stuck with me. And at the end, he wanted to go out to dinner because he's saying, how do I steward my sphere? And he said, and Spielberg is a friend of his, and Jackie Mason is a neighbor of his. He says, my friends, my Jewish friends in Hollywood, there's something we're supposed to steward. And he's just, I'm not ready to convert. I don't know what you're talking about entirely. But what got to him was, he is a steward of the gifts and calling of God. Now that is true for everyone, Donald Trump included. We don't have to get them saved in order to get them to understand the responsibilities of stewardship. Does that make sense? So here, behavior, the favor of God gives us access. And as Ed was saying earlier, you're going among the wolves. So what do you want to have? You release your peace. Whose peace? Your peace. You're carrying a cloud of capacity. You let your peace come upon them, and what happens? Reverse mind control. The demons talking to them are bound, and they hear God. And what do you think God's saying? I would do business with this guy if I was you. I trust him. And what they'll say to you, they'll say, we don't normally do this. This isn't how we typically do things around here. I'm going to give you this guy's number. Tell him I told you to call him, and he can call me. And what happens is favor is manifest when the rules are broken and God makes an exceptional distinction on your behalf. But that favor is manifest in the force of people. What you're doing is you're binding demons, and these people are under your influence. The difference between you and witchcraft is you're a liberating force. Witchcraft is a manipulating force. And that's what God was chiseling for 10 years in your life. So now you've got access to the high places. What happens? Watch this. This is where we have to have a theology that's thought through and not just, hey, I made a fortune, I'm doing a movie in Hollywood. Big deal. Because what happens is God gives you trust and credibility in the eyes of the world system. Pharaoh knows. This Jew knows something about my dream. Nebuchadnezzar knows. That Daniel, get him. I need to talk to him. Your behavior is what builds trust or destroys it. Your credibility has to be flawless. Your competence has to be excellent, because they might trust you, but they don't respect you. They won't invite you back. So you gain trust and respect, and you have access. Now what happens? You now have the ability to solve problems. Remember, we heal the sick, we raise the dead, we cast the demons. None of us has thought about this in terms of your business, culture, or community. You got authority over demons in a school system, just like nicotine demons in your neighbor. Solving problems means, look at this. If we can have dinner with them, build friendships with them, develop trust and rapport, they'll share their thoughts and feelings. They'll tell you about the kid that's on drugs. They'll invite you into a bigger world than you thought of if they trust you and they respect you. So now we take our behavior, builds trust, and then we drop it down. We want to solve problems within that mountain, and to do that we have to have rapport. Rapport means we fellowship, we eat together. I believe Ed has this in his books too. What's the next level? You want to transform an organization, you want to transform Hollywood? You've got to move at the level of principles and values. You can't make the argument theology, but you can win the battle on principles, shared values. Here's what happens. Solve problems superficially. This is what consultants do. Like, you get paid for a Band-Aid. If you don't go deeper to lasting solutions. Lasting solutions for the economy. You know what the major advertising slogan is in the United States? We're unique in this. For fast temporary relief of most minor ailments. That's the stimulus package. It's a fast temporary relief of most minor depressions. So the problem is they're fast and they're only temporary. So the lasting solution is going to be how the values suddenly are applied, how principles of thrift, economy, self-control, responsible, compassion. And what does it do? Watch what happens. If we can build trust and credibility, solve problems with lasting solutions at a kingdom level of values and principles, trumping convenience and self-interest, what it does is, see, this is God's potential. It liberates the glory of God in a business, in an industry, or in a sphere. Now a government can look like the kingdom. Now a business can look like the kingdom. Now a university can look like the kingdom. Because there's a potential to glorify God in all those spheres. Does that make sense? So for you, you've been through this to go over to the other side, where the ites are. Little by little, we're going to possess more and more of the territory. But to do it, we got to drill, we got to dig till you hear the shovel go dink. And that'll change things. And we will see a transformed culture. But we need people that are willing to undergo the discipline of the process and identify each other.
There's significant theory laid out here, and it's part of the larger Seven Mountain concept for those that are watching by television or later, and you'll want to familiarize yourself with that. But Lance and I were determined to finish this session with a very practical application. One of the things I see here very clearly is the number of business professionals and others from around the world here who are seeking, in the midst of transition, to discern what the next steps are. And that's the climate we're in. And it is also a very exciting climate because this is the era in which one of the most frequently heard terms in business circles today is, of course, disruptive change, disruptive technology, disruptive influences. And we want something that's both disruptive and redemptively disruptive. And what I see here, Lance, is a very individual focus, preparing yourself under the chisel of God's character-building experiences in all of our lives. All of our lives. We share that. And then translating that into something to find where we are fitted together, because we're all going through chiseling in this era. The next question is, where do we find the stones that we're called to be fit together with? We can leave a conference like this with a lot of theory, training, insight. That's all valuable. But I think if we were to leave this session now with some practical ideas, the thing that has come to my mind over and over again is seeking discernment for where exactly you fit someone else, and doing it from not a need-centered focus, but a giving-centered focus. How do your gifts, skill, education, experience, background, and opportunities fit the needs of someone else? We all have needs, clearly. But if we're motivated by the desire to meet another's needs, or a composite need, an organizational need, an individual needs, it seems to me, based on my limited experience in the development under the chisel, that's where we see that divine component come in, and suddenly we are being fitted together. It's not our effort. Stones don't place themselves. They are placed.
Yeah, and so, the concluding thing is this, is when the apostles succeeded in their city, so look for a network that has geographic proximity. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother who is far away. You may be really closer to somebody halfway across the country, but in a battle, you really need the neighbor. So look for geographic proximity. Begin to ask the Lord for the divine appointments and the awareness of who in your geography is somebody you can trust. And there's a spiritual aspect to how God brings people into your life. The second thing I think is in Acts 4, when they were persecuted, the backlash for their success. When the beasts multiply, there's what we would call a favor backlash. The same favor Sarah Palin had one day became a horrific backlash 2 days later. So she can give you an interview on the favor backlash. But when a backlash happens, it's a compliment from the devil that he recognizes and takes seriously your capacity to dispossess him. When the apostles had a backlash in Jerusalem, they returned to their own company, which is a fascinating statement because it meant that the 12 apostles of the Lamb, with their own unique stature, had a company they went to when the backlash happened because they had quick, swift accord in the arena of intercession, which means that you need to also find the company in proximity you can pray with, who you can honestly share what's happening and not be afraid that it's going to get out in the street. And they together accessed an anointing with authority to break the agenda of that religious spirit and to administrate the kingdom at a whole new level of power. And those things happen if you can identify your company. So what are the characteristics you're looking for? You're just really praying and asking God to show you in your sphere, your geographic sphere, who are the people that I can connect with, and we need to reach out that way to each other. And the number one thing is, if you don't know your assignment, it makes it hard to know your alignment. So if you don't know you're called to transform a school system, it's going to be hard to put out the feeler for teachers. So clarity on your assignment is like a prerequisite to that prayer.
I think that's an excellent place to stop. John, thank you for inviting us to host this session and for being so receptive. I wish we had more time for Q&A, but I think we're on a tight schedule and must dismiss.
Great. Thank you, Gordon and Lance. They will both have individual sessions tomorrow. Tonight at 7 p.m., as you know, is the outpouring, and we have dinner in a couple minutes. Remember the book tables, the bookstore. 8:30 begins the first session tomorrow morning. So let me just have a short prayer of blessing over the evening and over the food. Father God, thank you for a great day that we've had. Make connections. Make a company. Form us. Grow us together. Tonight, tomorrow. Do your work. Do your will in authority and power, in healing, in manifestations. We call for that. We ask for that. Now bless us this evening. Thank you for the food we're going to partake in. In Jesus' precious name.